What did I do? I asked her. Since you're so smart, then figure it out, she said, stepping closer to me and balling her fists. I looked at her and gained a feeling that anything I said would be wrong in her eyes. Don't tell me your Catholic school education has failed you to the point of you not knowing how to rationalize your sins, she said, folding her arms. Not at all, I denied. I just don't know what you want me to say. What do you think you said? Seeing as how we've barely interacted in the last 24 hours, I made you mad over something I did that didn't have anything to do with you today. She grinded her teeth. Come down into my room, she said. I walked down there with her. I turned to her bed and saw Jordan sitting on it, his eyes filled with tears, and one evidently having gone down his cheek before I traveled down there. What are you crying for? I asked him. That's such a dumbass question, my mother said, looking over to my brother. Jordan here is obviously tearing up because of how you treated him. My mother pushed her shoulder into mine in a sort of now do you get it type of way. Aren't you going to say sorry? She asked me. What's the point? I asked her. You'll just find something else to latch on as a reason for how bad I am. Wrong answer. She turned her body toward me. Look here, kiddo, my mother said, tightening the folding of her arms. I believe you can do whatever you set your mind to and that the cynics and detractors at these schools don't define who you are. She pointed at my brother. But when you make people hurt, like you've done Jordan today, she said, you might as well not even be living and breathing. I stepped past her to get to the bed, coming over to Jordan's right side. I put my hand to his back and leaned into him for a hug. I'm sorry, I said. You got me at a bad time and I was feeling frustrated over some things, and even though I still am, I know I shouldn't have taken that out on you. He then wiped a tear away from his eye and smiled at me, extending his arms to embrace me. That's better, my mother said, stepping closer to the both of us. Now how's about we go up to Burger King and get some chicken fries? I nodded my head, and Jordan screamed out one of those youthful phrases kids nowadays are using. Within minutes, we got into the car and went to the fast food restaurant for a fast delivery of food. Now that I've used the same words twice in the same sentence, I'm thinking of deserving a repetition award. Jokes aside, the following morning, I woke at around 6:30 a.m. and immediately got dressed after that. I ate breakfast and got dropped off as usual. But when I was about to enter the school building, as my mother's car drove off, there was a heavy breathing I could hear approaching me. Justin, 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 the familiar voice screamed out, me turning to see that it was Gary. You're the latest and the greatest? There was an explosion at the car wash not too far from here. That's the latest, I told him, but that's not the greatest. You're right. I should have reserved that title for myself. I looked at him. Anyway, he said, we've got to get down there and stop it. We might want to get Lazuli for this, I told him. We might need all the help we can get. I sent her a text, let's bounce. The two of us rose into the sky, using one of the 5 energies, and Gary led me in the direction of the car wash. The scene was covered with dark smoke, the concrete scathed as though it had been punched by God himself, and the collateral damage extensive. Still, it seemed devoid of anyone there. They must have gotten away, I said. Good, Gary replied. Yeah. They can't hide forever, a masculine voice echoed from within the smoke, it clearing to reveal a young man with black spiky hair, a gray and black shirt, black pants, and gray boots. Black, Gary and myself said at the same time. In the flesh, he answered. You've caught me red-handed. I'm the perpetrator of this fine spectacle here. Why would you do this? Gary asked him, me rolling my eyes since we both knew the answer already. For the same reason I do every other crime I commit, Black explained. If you can't be famous, be infamous. Gary, staring straight ahead at Black, threw his arms in front of his face and looked over to me as I stood with mine down. Are we going to take him on together, or am I going to have to be by myself? Gary asked as if he really did not know. I don't think either of us can handle him alone, I told him, giving him a brief glance. Let's get him. Black smirked as we both rushed toward him. You guys have done this before, he said, jumping into the air. And you know, it never works out that way. Both of us ascended in the sky. Black smiled, disappearing for a moment as he rushed towards me and threw a barrage of punches, me pushing myself back in the air. When has just dodging ever won a fight? Black asked. Fight back. You'll get tired eventually, Gary shouted at Black. Justin, do you need some help, though? I'm fine, I told him. Black returned to his smile. That gives me an idea, Black said, placing his arms to his sides and looking at Gary. If you're fine, maybe your friend isn't. Gary threw his hands up, and seconds after, Black was standing right in front of him. My eyes widened as I recognized the move. I came to Black's back and wrapped my arm around his neck. If that attack hits me, you'll get hit too, Black said. That's the point, Raditz, I replied. Gary, throw it. Orlando Oblivion! Gary shouted as he unleashed a green orb toward the two of us. Black turning back to smile at me and throwing me in the way of the attack. Justin! I lost my grip in the sky purposefully and avoided it mere seconds before it would have hit me. The attack struck Black, though, hitting his torso directly, and he smiled. That attack should have ripped up your clothes, Gary said. You learn something new every day, Black answered. You can't expect for the same tricks to not catch on after a while. Black threw his fist into Gary, and the two had a back and forth of punches as they became smaller and smaller to me with each moment that I was falling to the ground. After hitting the ground, I ascended back into the sky and threw myself into Black's back as he was turned toward Gary. You hit the ground, Black said in surprise. You should be a broken man. One of the Earth Energy's properties is increasing durability, I told him, rushing toward him and getting into a lock of arms. Black smirked at me as the power struggle waged for seconds. Gary coming over to us and throwing his fist into Black's back. That's the best you've got, Black said, looking out the corner of his eye at Gary. You're just as strong as your weak friend here. Black looked at me then, grabbing my arms and getting out of the grip in doing so. I pushed him toward me by pulling my arms in, and he threw his knee into my stomach, slamming his head into mine next. You can imagine how much that hurt. Justin! Gary screamed, throwing a purple and white beam from his right hand before shouting, Fukatsu! Black moved out of the way of the beam, and we saw it fly further away from us. Looks like that attack of yours didn't do the trick, Black said, staring at the beam as it went further away and having his back turned to Gary, who threw a kick at him that Black caught. But if you want to keep changing things up, here's another step for you. Black punched Gary in the stomach, me rushing over to the two and Black smirking at me. You've got this thing about aiming for the stomach, I said as I threw a fist at Black that went directly into his face. So what? He asked me, taking my fist and holding back Gary's arms with one hand. How are you holding both of my arms with one hand? Gary asked as if he could read my thoughts. Black remained silent, giving a smile as he let go of Gary's arms and pushed him to the ground, apparently thinking that was enough to keep my friend down. Gary caught himself mid-fall, though. You've got persistence, Black said, looking down at Gary and then at me. You both do. I like that. He threw both hands to force Gary and fire to face Gary and fire a pink beam to the ground. However, he said, the beam letting off then, I don't like either of you. I rushed down, beating the beam to the ground and Gary moving out of the way by just a few inches when the beam landed, creating a wave of black smoke that engulfed us both and made everything around me naked to my eyesight. Gary, I screamed out, coughing and inhaling the smoke before thinking. I'm a fool. I can fly. I went into the air and looked around, the cloud of smoke now covering up a large part of the structure directly underneath me. I looked on the sides of it and no sight of him. Then I covered my mouth and dived down. Going inside once more, I saw him this time standing in place and covering his mouth with both hands, him not seeing me thanks to his eyes being closed. I grabbed him and pulled him into the air. Justin, Gary said while opening his eyes. I went back in there looking for you. My eyes widened. I did the same for you, I told him, raising my thigh closer to me and punching it. Why are you hitting yourself, he asked me. You could have gotten killed if I hadn't have gone in there for you, I said, frowning. And you wouldn't have gone in there if you didn't think I was still in. I'm a liability. That's not true. I'd have perished in there if you didn't come back. No, you'd have flown out, and if you'd fought Black alone, you wouldn't have been handicapped worrying about what happened to me, just like you were after that smoke came. He didn't say anything after that, though he did start flying on his own, taking the lead. Any idea on where Black could have gone? I asked Gary. Probably flew off to terrorize some news stations and take credit for what he did, Gary answered. You know his modus operandi. I stopped in place. Gary flying a few more feet before turning his back and stopping in place. I'm not coming, I told him, Gary looking back at me. I'm not feeling it, and the way I am now, you'd be better off without me.